Welcome to the first, or the second, of the GTLF, Georgetown Literary Festival lectures. If I was compelled to make the introduction for the session this morning, because apparently I like politicians, I invited myself to do the introduction and the facilitation of this session. Naveen Kishore has a formal biography, and you can read that in the, what do you call these things? The program. He is, I'm going to riff because I invited myself to do this because I've had two principal educations in my life. The first was very much the education given to me by my father, who kind of threw me into every deep end and made me find my way out through reading, through experience, to exploration. But the second major phase of education was picking up a book that was published by this amazing new publisher at that time called Seagull Books. I have since, I claim, it's self-proclamation. I think I'm the greatest owner of Seagull Books in the world. I think I have just about every copy that was published, but for one. Very special also because there is a particular book that I think not many people may know of, but it's several poems of Kali, the goddess, of Ramprasad that goes through various incarnations, and then also an attempt by Gayatri Spivak to do versions into English. That's one of the most treasured books in my home, especially since I'm a Kali Bhakt, follower of Kali. So Naveen Kishore is many, many things. He does inhabit a kind of liminal space. Today he's going to give a lecture called Self-portrait of the Other. A poet, a photographer, started out as a lighting designer, and a man who has such an incredible command of aesthetics of all kinds. So it's with great pleasure, and then we will have a conversation that I introduce and invite Naveen Kishore to deliver this Georgetown Literary Festival lecture.
Thank you so much. And thank you for having me here. And thank you for showing up. This is less a lecture and more a kind of slice of my life, perhaps even a journal that I will not keep. Unable to reach the bottle of ink on the writing table, I climbed up onto the chair, pushed the leather-bound bricks on the table to one side. Having made room for myself, I picked up the red notebook, went through it page by neatly filled page, till I arrived at a clean white sheet. I picked up the glass bottle full of blue ink, took out the conical stopper, looked around until I found the long, nibbed writing instrument I had seen my father use. I dipped it in the ink and began to doodle on the sheet in deep concentration, my tongue between my teeth, my elbows on the desk, my knees pressed against the rosewood top, making my own sense of a language that had not yet begun to reveal itself to me. I labored hard to fill the page like I had seen him do, my father. In my excitement, I knocked over the ink bottle onto the page, unable to stop the flow. I watched it bleed endlessly onto the paper, like a tidal wave. It swept over my painstakingly written, scratch-doodled sandcastle as it flowed on, devouring the white. a blue-fanged monster. I began to cry in confusion, in hurt. My tears flowed a river, chasing the ink, smudging, chiding, fighting the devastation with clenched fists. Then, as I watched, the ink slowed to a halt, close to the edge of the page, reared back, arched into a curve, revealed its coral green underbelly, turned on its heel, and began to call back its forces, gathered them into a swirling cloud that bored a hole into the center of the page, an army in blue deciding to drown in its own swell, till all that remained was an even, round circle, a blue lake, a calm, serene, contrite. The tears of a 4-year-old had washed the page clean. 20 minutes is what I have. How do you create so much emptiness? They asked him. It isn't empty, really, is it? I mean, there's the light. The stillness takes up space. Question to self, what is the stage experience made of? An iconography of impressions, influences, readings and viewings, drunkennesses and wantonnesses, illnesses born impatiently, learning to string green peas with a fork and knife, hero worshipping, lusting, restlessness and frustration, poverty, struggling in a body that senses movement but cannot replicate it, learning to beg for favors, living with mud-spattered faces, buried pride, and countless funerals, houses that sold out and those that had smaller audiences, failed queues and moments of magic, caring, detail, ingenuity, throwing caution to the winds, risks taken and toes stubbed, slippery slopes and replays, counseling sessions, loving women and men, being moved over issues that seem lost, politics, hours spent at railway stations, art and music and cinema, fabric and wood and metal and paint and paper and, of course, grease, and the never-ending desire to make what is not look like what is. I am a publisher, one who has learned to disrespect the notion of boundaries as we know them, not out of a sense of arrogance or I know better, no, out of reasons that are political, as most things these days need to be. And yes, cultural, always cultural our baggage, boundaries man-created, boundaries nation-made, but culture travels, translates. Therefore we transgress, not just boundaries, but also imagination. We subvert existing frameworks by suggesting different ones. A new way of being community. They set up nation states that ghettoize the book, make it a commodity to be hounded, chased to the ground, bought and sold across territories, across languages, like literary slaves. I guess what I'm attempting to express is that in this, our world of publishing, too much time, energy, money is spent on creating structures that ultimately box us in. Books are crisscrossing continents, languages, territories, flying with ease through the universe of ideas. I cannot repeat this enough. In a globalized world, Your geographical location is redundant. I am often asked about sustainability, about structure, about vision, and the ability to reinvent. I never have convincing answers. I have no scientific or rational methods of arriving at things. I live hand in hand or hand in glove with the uncertain and the intangible, the opposites of structure. I'm aware that I also live at a time that does not lend credence to that feeling at the pit of your stomach, that gut feeling, particularly not in business or politics. In fact, it is fast fading, even in the arts. Underlining all this is an urge to survive and to do things, specifically things in the arts. And this is precisely what independent publishers have been doing for so many decades. Survival carries with it a sense of the precarious. This is true, but it need not necessarily make for a strained, unhappy look. As long as you manage to take care of your daily necessities, you can produce a certain kind of book that few wish to buy. You can make it possible for an experimental performance to take place. You can exhibit an artist's work that no one else wished to present. Just begin, it will happen. How do I explain a lifetime of surviving in the arts on instinct? There are no strategies except that come with hindsight, retrospective logic, method that unveils itself after you have said yes to books that you perhaps liked only because of their title, or the instinct that taught you to read 150-word gists from French, German, Italian, Arab publishers while you swiftly made a choice. This one will work for me, maybe. Or perhaps you trusted a growing group of translators with exciting wish lists. And yes, also publishers who came to you with their own instinct about what they want to offer you. We publish what we want to publish. What we want to publish is what we find meaning-filled. Often this appears to be out of sync with trends around us. Our choices are to do mostly with freedom on the one hand, and the human condition on the other. Everything that rings a bell under these headings is worth considering across cultures, across languages, borders, ideologies. The unknown author gets as much space on the shelf as the known one. We see ourselves as part of a world community, so we openly share ideas, connections, thoughts, resources with other publishers, principles that respect translators and authors with equal courtesy. Ours is a practice that will always remain fragile. Our openness to ideas makes us receptive to all that is new and untried, especially in these times when culture is slowly but surely being hijacked by forces that are anything but benign. I feel watched in a way I have never been before. And I am afraid that a technology that I do not understand is both spying on me and entertaining me. I am under surveillance even as I am seduced by it. The all-pervasive day of our lives, the day as state, as a state of mind, as a powerful presence that will have its way, day as corporation, day as newspapers, as television, as theater, cinema, day as media with a capital M, day as power that knows no boundaries. They without conscience. Yes, it is like listening to music that is both hypnotic and evil, that attracts, that refuses to let go of my attention. I listen to the songs, but I do not understand the words. The space for other songs is not as free as it used to be. Question to self. What are the core beliefs that you would not compromise? To be honest, ethically in tune with myself, to remain working and with the arts, to not fall into the trap of creating commerce only, but commerce also. To be different from the mainstream, not out of arrogance, but because all of that is already being done, to up the ante always, whether by choice or by accident. The word accident. To remain open to them, to chance, to fate, to good old-fashioned luck. To keep a seat empty at the table for the unexpected but always welcome guest. To be independent in thought and deed, to embolden others to be the same, to practice what I preach, to put my money where my mouth is, to recognize and reward initiative with responsibility and freedom, to not be swayed by accolades, to persist, especially on the darkest of days, to be creative with whatever resources are at hand, to recognize that there are always resources at hand, minds, ideas, connections, people, money. The core belief is this, that the personal and the political are the same. All our work must arise from this, and we must at all costs fight for independence, whether that concerns artistic expression, literary thought, or a way of earning our livelihood. I can't repeat this enough. It isn't about size or scale. It is about making the choice that allows you to risk stepping outside the structures so magnificently set up by the world of corporate publishing, to publish books that in our opinion need to exist, to find readers who must exist. Target audiences are a myth. No one can know for certain what people will read. It is always after the event of the book being bought and read that you grow wise to the fact, not before. And often corporate wisdom can make you slip into what can sympathetically be called the mainstream, that which others before you have done with apparent success that they can replicate book after book at will, with figures to back them up. The familiar formulae of success. If you do this and this and this and this, you will have a bestseller. So do it. Multiply your profits. Perfectly acceptable. Often the same wisdom winks back at you and asks, what if you throw me out of the window and let your good sense prevail? That gut feeling, let it rise and envelop you. Do the thing you want. Not a question of the right thing or its opposite, the wrong thing. Just the thing that must be done. Because, well, someone should. So it may as well be you, the independent publisher. Siegel thrives on relationships with authors, with other publishers, and the entire book reading, bookmaking, book selling community, with cultures as wide apart as your average ocean, with readers equally widespread and invisible, till they choose to show themselves. But to make them appear, you need to make books they can relate to. Books that you have nurtured into reality, books that you have bet your life on, not once, but each time you publish. You know that phrase, going out on a limb? Well, if you want to be independent, then you better get used to walking on that limb. Question to self. What, in your opinion, is an honest piece of writing? One that has a retrospective logic, retrospective magic, born out of intuition at the time of writing. One that plays hide and seek with both the rationale and its aftermath. A practice that is an acknowledgement of the fear of the unknown as it unfolds word after word and begins to arouse your senses as you write. The muse is active only when you allow yourself to write wearing a blindfold over a pair of tightly shut eyes and your hands bound behind your back so that you cannot loosen the knot either out of impulse or deliberate intent in order to cheat your muse. The muse is best served, and in turn best serves you, if it remains invisible and faceless. Honesty implies vulnerability. Will the words I knit make sense, resonate with the reader? It doesn't matter how harsh the truth is. But if it is to work, the writing must slip past the reader's defenses, their armor of rehearsed responses, your vulnerable self made visible through their reading. How do you find your way? Without a compass or a map, particularly when you have set out to grasp, or better still, embrace what is intangible. To somehow empty oneself as you would a vessel, filling it. The self thus emptied can receive and simultaneously transmit. Therefore, another act of translation. Those barely visible italicization between words, like white on white etchings on handmade paper, swelling and throbbing to the touch of one's thoughts, remaining otherwise hidden, concealed, invisible to the eye. The mind blinded by the white, blankly staring back at itself. Only the braille that its fingers caress can speak what we want to hear. The uncharted is about translation as intimacy, as surrender, as in completely drowning in the act of reading, like love, loving the other text language, writing enough to completely immerse yourself in it. Become pliant. No place for the self as ego or personality with its own views. To be possessed by the spirit of the chosen text language, piece of literature, poetry, as in single-minded devotion to the text. I say to you what others have said to me. Let intuition be your compass. Look for a credible or incredible way to slip the confines of your head, your brain, your training, most of all your learnedness. Do things intuitively. Risk. Always for the uncharted to be made a conduit for your personal creativity. The risk-taking is vital. The uncharted is intuitive. Dark times, but you already know this. What is important is to teach our young the possibility of resistance. The constant need to be vigilant, aware, involved, active. The activity that translates a creative impulse into activism. Translation as a need to right that which is wrong, righting wrong, describing through your writing the ills, the injustices that remain hidden in the midst of a dailiness that is so taken for granted as a way of life, as in, this is the way things are, have been, will be, nothing to be done. So, translating these stories into existence. Translation as midwifery, then, perhaps. Challenge the language you have so carefully cultivated. Revisit the meaning of words you have since childhood imbibed as universal truths. Consider the act of translation as impulse, as motivation, as a telling of that which would otherwise remain untold. So speaking out and speaking about the forbidden, maybe smash the frames that rule the act of translating from one language into another. Translation as action, as activism, craft made passion. What matters is to subvert the status quo. Translation as subversion. Translation as a literary act, as a political act, as cinema. Translation as theater. Resistance as a way of life. Ways also of living a life that is not without hope. Therefore, a life of hope, a life that suggests the possibility of goodness, like everything else. Goodness is a practice. You have to learn the skill, study its variation, practice hour after hour, for days at a stretch, for a lifetime. Translation as resistance. Publishers resist, period. Notes from the recent Frankfurt Book Fair, a mecca for publishers. There is anxiety, a kind of unraveling, a sense of things slowly losing their way. There was a time when the courteous security staff at Frankfurt or Munich or Berlin airports would smile at your hand baggage full of shapes that would only be books, unlike other countries where the books had to be taken out, split open, their spines upturned in case the pages shed some dire secrets. Germany knew books. The book fair at Frankfurt was a celebration of the written word and diversity, a word that is in danger of disappearing in these dark times. The business of books, too, seems sometimes no longer to be the collective act it once was. Ideas often take a back seat. The book as product is what matters, and the numbers, of course, prevailing. One feels more than the word. Yet not all has been lost. There remains room for emotion, affection, creativity that makes this year after year fair so very worthy. The words shocking and tragic no longer express the turmoil turned helplessness, turned anger, turned twisted, tormented guts. Literature has for some time now lost the ability to find hope in the hopelessness that we are facing every day as citizens, as ordinary beings. Language has turned its back on us at one level. At another, it is being used to turn us into supplicants without a voice. Words refuse to heal. We are no longer governed by people who treat governance as a calling. Adania Shibli, author of an extraordinary testimony, minor detail, denied the right to speak at an award she hasn't asked for. An award is given, bestowed, in honor, in appreciation, a decision not of her choice. Neither was the denial. She was gifted the lack of ceremony during the book fair. If the ceremony were held, she said, she would have taken the opportunity to reflect on the role of literature in these cruel and dark times. That is all. October 7th will not end. It will go on until some other date supplants it with even more murderous intent. I conclude with a little text for the many Shiblis that inhabit our being. A clasp, like curving your hands around an imaginary neck. This is not to suggest that this is what you do as a pastime, or as part of your daily ruminations, as a wordsmith, a writer, a poet, a playwright, one who plays with words, only so you can get a visual sense of what I'm talking about, not with murderous intent, not necessarily with the caress of a lover, certainly not in envy, or some far-fetched notion of measuring it for an eventual gift, once you would use to adorn the neck of your muse. Just a neutral clasping of a neck that isn't there, an absent neck. Therefore you have to make do with an approximate circumference. So, an average neck, or a neck embedded in your memory, as necks often are, so you can measure the size of the ring your hands will make around the neck, the one that isn't there. So air, trying to get your interlaced fingers, the ones that have closed ranks around air, air that is so vital for breathing, not imprison, mind you. That is not what you wish to do, hold anyone captive. You just want to keep that which you imagine you will soon grasp within a circle, perhaps even one that is charmed or magical, or one that protects, just so you can question whatever it is that is within this circle formed by your hands. Or so you say, or so you think, not in a manner that suggests interrogation. God forbid, you're not like that, are you? Out of curiosity, maybe, or because you sense that something revealing will take place within this airtight embrace, this holding that which is not in fact present, this imagined presence of an absence that you think is of vital importance. Or else, why would you take the extreme step of grasping the neck that may have been there were it actually present, while you made this plan of clasping your hands around a neck that only you could see in your mind? Yes, in your mind, where it is all taking place, where the words you seek are grouping together, bands of resistance, finding ways of escaping, breaking the grasp of vice-like fingers round their necks, the tight clasp, the one you have formed in the hope of keeping the alphabet from fleeing. You can't, can you? Keep an alphabet from expressing itself, from forming words and sentences, language of its own free will. You cannot dictate to your muse. You cannot silence it either. Thank you.
Thank you, Naveen. We'll have a short kind of conversation, and then I'll open it up to the floor. And if anyone has anything to say, observations to make. I was very drawn to that. I was very drawn to the kind of language you still have faith in. Words like devotion and resurrecting the muse, the idea of the muse. In a world of publishing where so much is about the self-declarative writer and the principles of the tribe and ideology, and where does language like this belong these days?
Where does language like this belong?
Devotions and the muse.
Well, my intuitive answer is it belongs in this world. It's just that we are embarrassed and shy and sometimes fearful of using it. Like the word romantic, which is seen as an awkward thing. And I've always felt that it's perfectly all right. It's like I'm often dismissed in a very affectionate way. Oh, he's a romantic, he's a risk taker, he does all this, he's an owner publisher. And yet, there is all of those things in me, but there's also mental math, like a snap of fingers. So when you choose something that you do, which in the eyes of the world seems like madness or precarious or risk-taking, why would you want to do this for a limited audience, be it art or book or whatever? My mental math is as strong as any other corporate honchos. It's just that it's commerce with the ceiling, so I know what I stand to lose at any given moment. But I don't need a calculator for it. So it happens quickly and therefore appears to be either foolish or instinctive. But the language exists. We just tend to kind of, hide it.
And why? What are we afraid of?
I think I don't know, so many things coming at us in this world, right? Even in this morning's session, we were discussing this whole business of a certain kind of social presence that is like a blitzkrieg. It's constantly there. People perhaps don't want to appear vulnerable. And I just feel that the virtue of vulnerability is very alive in the same way there are readers still alive, and that there's this constant fear of the book disappearing, or writing stopping, or our young not reading. You can at best say that the surfaces will change. You may not want to feel the material and the fabric and the paper, but there will be other surfaces. You will always write, and I will always read. So, one spends so much time and energy being fearful. I think that sort of thing.
And where do you think this fear comes from? Increasingly, the machine?
No, I mean, partly it is having to arrive somewhere, to be somebody or be something, or seem or appear to have achieved, right? We forget the process, the doing, the constant practice. I was saying this to friends yesterday. We were talking about the fact that it took me many decades to be discovered as a writer. Not took me, took others. For the last 11 years, I write every single day, but it's more in the form of what musicians do, a certain riyaz, practice. You just stick to it, It's not because you're trying to be perfect, but because you need to do that, particularly today. And whereas most of us are trying to forget that. We write to be read, to be published, to be, there's a whole, it was taken for granted that being the hotshot publisher I am, I will publish my own books. But it took many lives to reach a stage where somebody accidentally discovered you and brought out a book and brought out a second book and is bringing, so there is a kind of organic thing that happens. It's just that we're constantly worried that we may not reach or arrive in time. In the same way I say about our books, this is our 41st year in publishing. It took the market 30 years to notice us, while you kept building a corpus of diverse literature. You kept at it. And it's not for you to whine to the world or beat your chest about how difficult it is for independence. Of course it's difficult for everybody. We meet young people here upstairs setting up display of books, and it's difficult for everyone. But you need to keep doing. And particularly in this world, the doing is what keeps you alive.
Let's do it in this way. Do you have any questions and observations, and then we can, kind of make it a bit more democratic. Is that okay? Yeah. Anyone want to ask anything? Or have a response? Yeah, Nitya. And then Lola.
Hello, everybody. I'm Alina. I just want to follow up to what Naveen said about vulnerability. I think every writer feels that. Every writer feels that. But personally for me, vulnerability, because you mentioned that. Did you feel vulnerable then as opposed to today because you've achieved so much in literature so far?
No, I don't wake up thinking I've achieved in that sense. It's not like an active whatever. It's when people respond to you, and when I say people, I mean either the readers or the community of publishers or writers or authors or translators, or just an unknown mass that buys your books, that trusts your instincts. That's when you think or know and you count your blessings, in the sense that each year I go to Frankfurt, and I've been going from the 80s, and each year I come back and say, today's technology, why do we spend such a fortune going? What is the reason? It's not that you're signing contracts and drinking champagne, it happens through the year. You go for precisely this reason of belonging to a particular community. Strange people come to you at the stall who don't have an appointment, who say, you know, I have a little bookstore in Serbia, and I've been coming for 15 years to pick up a catalog and to salute that you are doing something. Keep doing it, please keep doing it, that kind of thing. So the vulnerability is something I've always embraced. It is very strange. I grew up being a very reclusive in my relationships, in the sense that if you and I were married, I would never confront you. I would just, you know, and it took me 2 years of a disastrous marriage to realize that you talk, you discuss, you be vulnerable, you share. And it's up to the other person to either squish it or to nurture it. So it's important. So I just do this. I practice it as a kind of intuitive thing. But it's not, when I wrote about pride and mud-spattered faces, it's something I used to argue with my musician son about the fact that, you know, your face is strong enough. Take a little shit. Say sorry. You know, it's okay.
Thank you, Naveen. Nitya here. I enjoyed the format of the lecture. I think, it was a letter to the self. And it contained a series of commandments and injunctions, I felt, to yourself as an independent publisher in this world today. You reminded yourself, I think, if I'm reading this and heard it right, of the importance of authenticity and vulnerability and rebellion, of transgression, of insurgency, of breaking boundaries and borders. You reminded yourself to eschew commercial and corporate interests and motivations. My question to you is, it all sounds terribly tiring and thankless. At what point does the rebellion end? At what point do you rest and relax both your mind and your eyes? And at what point do you find fulfillment, or is it just a total journey of sacrifice, and then you end spent?
No, I hope I didn't come across tireless and sort of sense of martyrdom or anything of the sort. I've always said that you take the stress of resources, because every independent depends on resource, money, kind of cash flow. Nobody's thinking vast amounts of profits and so on and so forth. That's the only, within quotes, tension that you have. But there's such joy and pleasure in doing this, and especially the relationships. Imagine the situation in the Indian context, and you would recognize it here too, which is that 75 years of independence, and you've been told by the English-speaking West that you buy from us for your region. We will cherry-pick your Satyajit Rays and your whatever, Tarkovsky diaries or whatever for the rest of the world. So I questioned that in 2005 and spent £50 setting up a company, incorporated as an independent publisher in the Great Britain, Seagull Books London Limited, where the express political choice was not to be an architectural reality. It's a globalized world, they had told us, so the location didn't matter as long as you delivered. And delivery is not just about design and editing and aesthetics and integrity and ethics. It's about all of those. It's also about very vital courtesy you owe your authors, not of sales and marketing, but of visibility. Once we sorted that, we are distributed into the world by the University of Chicago Press. Now, when this began to be recognized, and you're now 18 years old, and that from 2005, and 600 books that you own world rights for from all over the world in different languages, that brings joy. You don't feel the exhaustion. It kind of balances it. The chance meetings, the relationships, who walks in if you keep an open door, that itself is exciting. I miss the theater, which used to mean, in our cultural context, booking an auditorium 6 months ahead, rehearsing, casting, choosing. To me, every book is like that. It's like I still, I think the theater taught me so much that it's very hard to take it away from the work that I do. It also teaches you problem solving. And your word, tirelessness. I genuinely don't feel tired or feel my 342 years, but quite seriously, the stress now is of a different kind. So there's a difference. In a city like Calcutta, which we grew up in, which used to be lauded as this great cultural capital, literature, etc., for years now has appeared to be not tired, but exhausted. You can be tired, go to your friendly spa, whatever. But the exhaustion is very difficult to pull your socks. And nobody else will do it for you. So I think, there's no real specific answer. It's just, I'm thinking aloud when you question it. I just feel that the next idea and the next idea. Yesterday, Alvin and I were having a chat, and we've created things into 25, which we hope will happen, where governments are not involved, funding agencies are not involved. He has to go bankrupt, and I have to attempt to go bankrupt, and that's how it works. Seriously, I mean this, people to people, and people call my bluff often. That's how it is.
Anybody else? Yes, Cynthia.
Fellow panelists are not meant to ask questions.
Is that not fair? Sorry. You've mentioned previously that you have a real discipline when it comes to writing. You write almost religiously every single day. And I think we heard the almost epistolary nature of your poems. But I'm curious, how do you think your writing process affects the style of your poetry, and has that changed over the years?
I think I kind of tend to, I'm not trained, and I tend to see images, and I think that may have something to do with my photographic practice or my lighting design or whatever. I tend to see and hear first. That's the first thing. And it's not a very labored thing for me so far, in the sense that I don't revisit it often. Which is a combination of part of nervousness that I might want to tinker it just now, and I'm actually enjoying what has just appeared, and a certain very secure sense of feeling that I'm surrounded by one or two unbelievably amazing and compassionate editorial colleagues who could pitch in should I need the help at the end. So, between that. So the actual, but if you look at form or style, I don't think I have one in a particular kind of way. It depends on the nature of the content. And if you're writing every day, what you have is different folders. And you have the time that's unfolding, expecting you to respond to it one way or the other, right? So you may have a folder that says nature, you may have a folder that says fables, or you may have a folder that says naked like breath, or you have a folder that says Kashmir or Palestine or whatever, you know. So it's not as if there have been occasions when for 2 weeks you're writing 62 poems because you've been influenced by a book you read about a certain kind of Calcutta you grew up in, and the translation is so superb, it actually spawned 62 poems in 2 weeks, my city poems. And then I let them be, and they're still my great favorite. But many years later, my publisher has recently commissioned me to write on a street in Calcutta, which is very iconic, about 30,000 words, a street called Park Street, which is cafes, restaurants. And I grew up on Park Street. I used to work with every single musician. I've rehearsed in those restaurants after 12 at night when they close and all the rest of it. It was very strange that that triggered off another set of city poems about a woman I thought I had no space for in my memory, a woman who I call Mrs. C. She was the mother of a young friend of mine in what we used to call good old Anglo-India in the 70s. And I suddenly wrote 17 poems on her. She was a very strange person, but obviously it stayed. So a lot of it has to do with what affects you, what's happening in the country. There's a lot of political fables. There's a whole songs of resistance thing happening. So, but everything finds its voice in sometimes there are overlaps, but sometimes they look like different people have written them. And then you can, you go back and forth, and so on and so forth. Even my first book, Notted Grief, happened like an organic, coincidental thing in the hands of an editor in Australia. It became political and private grieving. I hadn't intended it necessarily like that. To me, there were different folders. So that kind of thing. I hope that helps.
We've got about 5 minutes, so I'm going to use moderator's privilege and ask the last. I've got 2 questions. As I said, I'm the greatest collector of seagull books. You ought to give me a prize one of these days. But we had an interesting conversation when I asked you whether you were traveling a lot, and you said, whether you were traveling a lot, and you said, no, I'm more and more based in Calcutta. And one of the reasons was that many of the authors you used to know and engage with are dying. Now, I'd like to know where the new authors are coming from that are of interest to you. And the second and final question is basically, I love the way you began the first image about the bottle of ink and you climbing on the table as a really nice metaphor about the kind of acrobatics we need to keep these things alive. How flexible and versatile are our limbs today?
How flexible?
And versatile are our limbs today?
Our collective limbs? Well, they seem to be fairly constrained if we allow the people we elect to call the shots. I think they're much more nimble. We've got used to, at least in our country, in this lovely word that the young have adopted called pop-up. You create, your institutional spaces are shrinking, dying out. You're, but at the mercy of, for example, I'm in Bengal, which is governed by a party that is in opposition to the center, so you feel a false sense of security, but your antennas are always out for various reasons. But you don't do what a lot of our publisher friends in New Delhi are being forced to do, which is self-censor. You don't second guess. You know that now you will, at some point in the future, be stopped from doing what you do. Why second guess? It creates stress at your life. When it happens, they now physically stop you. Nobody just pinpricks or, warns you or cautions you. You're kind of whatever. So yeah, there's that side of it. But the earlier thing about what I meant about the dying authors is that my preferred form has always been love letters. So I don't know how to write a business letter. And it leads to relationships. It leads to being, familial with all kinds of writers, and I used to go to Frankfurt. I would travel to these people who couldn't come to Frankfurt. The younger ones can, right? And the younger ones are constantly growing because you trust a circle of translators. The older ones, I lost somebody in France, Bonnefoy, who I used to visit. And it was very interesting about his death. He was 93, and I get a letter on his daughter's email saying, "Dear Naveen, thank you for being my friend, my principal English language publisher, etc., etc., etc. And I have been given 4 days to die. So I will be moving to a hospice. But keep writing like you do and sharing. My daughter, while I'm alive, will read it to me." So I kept writing for the next 8 weeks, little over 8 weeks. And then I was cremating another artist friend at 93 somewhere in India, and I got a message saying he's passed away. And then I went and met the daughter, and she said, you know, it was very funny because he was given 4 days, and after 8 weeks he called his doctor and said, "What happened to my death?" Such privilege, such privilege. And the next morning he just slept through it all. So there were relationships like this, and in that context, what I was telling you, that I have, you know, they're 92, 88, all these wonderful minds, you know. If your mind is functioning, you're at your peak at that age, right? If the mind lets you down. I've had authors who've been into a fog for 8 years, 10 years, 12 years, and they kind of die for you in a certain kind of way. But with these, where the mind is functioning with an artist or a filmmaker, etc., you just think, oh my God, the next project, oh, he died too young, that kind of thing. But a lot of it is relationship and trust. Trust is very important, you know, other people's instincts. You can't always be right yourself.
It was a beautiful way to begin, it's a beautiful way to end. So for all writers, be assured, there's always the next day. Thank you very much for being with us. Thank you, Naveen. That was really...
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you, Eddin. Thank you. Thank you.